Welcome to another day of Bhagavad Gita Sadhana. We're exploring what your path could be out of the 18 paths laid out in the Gita. Maybe you choose one, or maybe more than one appeals. We're looking at the fourth path. It builds off the third path, which is the path of action, Karma Yoga. And this chapter, as we mentioned yesterday, is about the end of action through knowledge. It's really good for people who don't know how to stop doing sometimes. So, what happens if you can't figure out how to stop doing? Like you say, I would love to do more yoga and meditation, but I am just too busy. Well, here's a chapter for you. When I sit outside, I could think I'm just sitting here, and that's one experience. Or I can think I'm meditating for my betterment, and that's another experience. Or I could think I'm meditating because if I help myself feel better, it impacts the whole world. And that's a third view. So if you feel like you're too busy, instead of taking the attitude that, well, I'm just doing something, or, well, I'm doing something for the betterment of myself, if you can take it to that third level of, I'm doing something that's bettering myself and the world, that's the goal of this chapter. And what it says is, fortunately, any act can be done this way. So I'll chant a little bit from chapter 4. I'll start with verse 423 and I'll skip around a little. So 423 says, without attachment freed, whose mind is established in knowledge, who does work only as sacrifice, his action wholly melts away. So if we do any action with the idea that we're doing it for a higher purpose, then it frees us instead of binds us. What that means is many of us do actions simply for the results. I go to a job I hate. This is just an example. I go to a job I hate every day, but I get a paycheck. And you're creating suffering and also bondage to that paycheck, which we talked about a little in chapter 1. It got to the point where people in chapter 1 couldn't do what they thought was right because they really wanted the paycheck. If you had a job that you would do, even if you didn't get paid, that's said to be your calling. And many of us talk about that as a hobby, for example. But maybe reframe that. It's your vocation, your calling. And then also in this chapter, verse 432, thus many forms of sacrifice are laid out in sacred writings. Know them all to be born from acts, so knowing you shall be released. Many different spiritual traditions lay out things that they consider sacred. For example, for Christians during the Easter holiday and the period of Lent, giving alms is considered sacred. Or keeping vows of certain types considered sacred. That happens in a lot of traditions. But for those of us who think I really have to stop doing, so I need to do more yoga, no, you can just make whatever act you're doing into something you view as a sacrifice. Because as the Gita says, all sacrifice ultimately comes from an act. Even thinking higher things is an act, because as we'll see in an upcoming chapter, the mind commits actions. In fact, we can't act without the mind, right? Most of us, even just to talk, the mind is going. To breathe, there's a part of that brain, that brainstem, that's keeping us going. So let's consider that today, especially on a day that many people around the world worship as being the most holy day. And part of the reason is it really takes the ultimate, and I do mean ultimate in all its forms, act of every human being and turns it into something sacred, which is dying. And many of us, I think, have this fear of, is my life lived in vain? And when I die, is my death going to be, anonymous, forgotten, ignoble? What is my body going to be like when I die? What is my mind going to be like when I die? And if we can turn this idea of even death is a sacrifice in some way, however way you want to form that, then we transform that fear into something more akin to love and to peace, perhaps. So this is a great yoga for finding peace. Today, I'm dedicating this practice to Cookie Carrasco. And if you're not a baseball fan, you might have no idea who that is. In Cleveland, a young star pitcher on his way up named Cookie Carrasco, Carlos, was diagnosed during the season as having leukemia. And of course, he had to stop playing and go through treatment. And he could have just succumbed to that. However, he came back and he is pitching again for the Cleveland Guardians today. So good for you, Cookie. I can only imagine how you felt during the chemo, having watched my mother go through it. Thank you for your sacrifice in showing us all we can come back from something that seems overwhelming. As you contemplate today, I invite you to think of one mundane act, whatever, that you feel you can really transform into something sacred. Oh, my spiritual guide is here to make sure I know that going in and out of the door is something sacred. Keeps him safe. Little guy. Let's practice. Stay in. Good boy. Let's sit, shall we? See you in 5. Let's sit where we can see each other. That's even better. Welcome back. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining today. You've helped make these 15 minutes very sacred for me. Whatever tradition you may follow, or none at all, may you have a happy and holy day. Just your intention can make any day a holy day. Let's see what happens tomorrow, shall we? Until then.